The, the BRICS 2019 summit in Brazil, what's on the agenda and what do 5 world leaders hope to accomplish? Hello, I'm Mike Walter and this is The Heat. Leaders from the 5 BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are meeting in Brasilia. During the 2-day summit, they will discuss major issues like the economy, trade, and innovation, and the leaders are also engaging in bilateral meetings. Our regular host of The Heat, Anand, Naidoo, is covering the event for us. He's joining us from Brasilia. Also with us is Thiago de Aragao. He is Director of Strategy for Arko Advice, a political analysis and consulting company. Joining us from Beijing is Chen Chenchen. She's a research fellow with the Institute of China's Economic Reform and Development at Renmin University. And also with us here in the studio is Sourabh Gupta. He's a resident senior fellow at the Institute for China-America Studies. I want to welcome all of you to the show. And Anna, why don't we kick it off with you? You're there in Brasilia. A busy time. Give us a scene setter. What are you seeing so far?
You're right, Mike. A very busy time. Great to talk to you from Brasilia. I think the key event today was a bilateral meeting that took place this morning, that's Wednesday morning here in Brasilia, between the Chinese President Xi Jinping and the host president, Jair Bolsonaro, of course, the president of Brazil. I want to get to that meeting in a moment, but first let me bring you up to speed on some developments in the last hour here in Brasilia. All 5 leaders of BRICS have been addressing the business forum, the BRICS Business Forum. They're not just politicians here in Brasilia right now. Each delegation has come with businessmen from their respective countries. These business people, of course, are looking for opportunities to expand their businesses for investments as well. President Xi addressed the forum. One of the things he said in his opening remarks was that the current downturn in the world economy can be blamed on protectionism and what he termed bullying. That was a clear reference there to the United States. But he said that despite the difficulties and challenges, these can be overcome. He pointed to the fact that China has contributed an average of 30% to the growth in the world economy over the last 5 years. He pointed to the fact that China continues to open up to foreign investment and invited the other BRICS member countries to join the Belt and Road Initiative, saying that that offered them enormous opportunities. Now, getting back to this morning's meeting, this was a very important meeting between President Xi Jinping and Jair Bolsonaro, the Brazilian president. They talked for some time. They came out, and then we saw them actually witness a whole range of agreements being signed. Of course, they cover an enormous number of sectors, from agriculture, trade, the economy, medical research and exchanges, even film and television cooperation. In fact, the head of the China Media Group was here representing China to sign that agreement, and that was what was signed at that time. Both leaders came out smiling, looking very positive. They addressed the media. This is part of what they had to say. Let's start with the Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro.
Os acordos assinados.
China and Brazil should take the 45-year mark of diplomatic relations as the new starting point. The two sides should insist on promoting mutual respect, equality, and win-win cooperation. We should understand and support each other's core interests.
The signed agreements have the potential for us to grow for the good of our people, and China will be an important part of the future of Brazil. All of us, Brazilians and Chinese, will benefit from moments like this.
Mike, I have to put something in context, and that is, despite the smiles that we saw on the positive outlook, what we saw in Brasilia take place this morning was the culmination of months of effort, some would say up to a year of efforts, to repair what was a very fraught relationship between China and Brazil. And this started before President Bolsonaro was elected. You remember that during the campaign, while he was campaigning for office, he was very critical of China. At one time, he made that infamous statement about China wanting to buy Brazil. So what we saw today was the culmination of those efforts. In a sense, it was completing those efforts as well. Mike?
And there are other bilateral meetings going on. Give us a sense of what else we're seeing there.
Yeah, of course, this is an important time for all these leaders. It gives them an opportunity to talk to each other and talk together as a group as well. Well, the other important bilateral meeting that took place this afternoon here in Brasilia, and that was between the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. These two countries are trying to cement their relationship. In fact, they're trying to grow this relationship. Narendra Modi was in Russia about 2 months ago. He was in Vladivostok, where they held a meeting there. In fact, India has extended a $1 billion line of credit to Russia to develop that very remote part of eastern Russia. It may be remote, but it's full of resources. India recognizes that and has extended that to the Russians. So their meeting took place this afternoon. The other important thing that we should watch here at this meeting is the new development bank, sometimes known as the Brics Development Bank. This is the finance arm of Brics. This is when it gets to the nuts and bolts of what this organization does. There's been a little bit of frustration with the new development bank. Some people say that its development has been too slow, its growth has been too slow, that there's been delays in its capitalization, etc. But it's going to be addressed here, and that is something that these leaders will be talking about when they get together. Well, I have with me right now, as you mentioned, Thiago Aragao. Thiago, great to have you. I want to talk about these 5 countries. They're very disparate countries if you look at their economies. I mean, just look at one metric. If you look at the growth rates, it's only China and India that have met expectations since the creation of BRICS in 2006. South Africa and Russia have not, and since 2010, Brazil has not. So they're very different economies. How do you reconcile those economies in an organization like BRICS?
Well, BRICS is an organization that is always seeking to find its identity. It's an identity that is renewed year by year, or depending on who is leading each country at a specific moment. One of the things is that the BRICS is basically a combination of efforts of what the countries want to be, what they want to do, or what they aspire to do with each other in the foreseeable future. Not necessarily something that they are able to do right now, but because of these disparities in the economy, there are disparities in political views or whatever differences we might identify. But basically, the aspiration of how they can manage these differences and what can be accomplished by the management of these differences.
Right, you did mention differences in political views. That has been talked about, particularly with regard to Venezuela. We have, Russia and China on one side of that debate, and we have Brazil on the other side. In fact, that was something that was pointed out in an interview that the former trade minister did with CGTN. He's also the vice chair of the Brazilian Congress. Let's listen to part of what he had to say.
Óbvio que, sobretudo na questão da economia.
Regarding the economy, trade, the BRICS are united. But looking on the geopolitical side, there is a dissonance between Brazil, Russia and China, particularly when these last two, Russia and China, show support to neighboring countries here in Latin America.
So basically he's saying that, yes, look, there are differences, but it's not going to be really an obstacle because these countries are focusing on the economy. But in time, will it be an obstacle for these countries to find a common voice as far as politics are concerned?
Eventually, it could be a problem, but what we can identify today is a profound lack of knowledge in the majority of the countries regarding each other's politics. And perhaps this lack of knowledge is, in real terms, a lack of interest into diving deeply into the core of the essence of the political views of each one. Venezuela is a very clear example because it's a border issue, it's a country that had a long-term relationship with Russia and China, but in other issues, these political barriers, they might not be a problem unless it becomes inevitable, like the Venezuela issue, for these countries to talk about. And then we have to see how this would affect economy and, above all, trade, which, the way I understand, is the #1 focus of the BRICS, at least in this current BRICS generation of these current 5 leaders.
Thiago, one of the things that President Xi talked about at the Business Forum this evening was the fact that there is rising protectionism in the world right now. He called it bullying. He was referring to the United States. How does that affect BRICS countries, or the developing world in general, for that matter?
Well, obviously it affects. We are in a crossroads in the global economy, and not only that, in the perception of how domestic economies must be run. It's natural that we have some countries that are always going to emphasize protectionism, because that's not only a strategy or a tool for their economic appliances, but it's also cultural. Brazil is a country that culturally the businessmen here have been used with protectionism. The United States, the same. Many European, the French, the same with their farmers. So protectionism, it's also a cultural issue. Opening a multilateral view and an open market, it's something that has to be taught, trained, and it requires a more positive global economy in order for you to try some of the open economic trade views.
Let's talk about the new development bank, otherwise known as the Brics Development Bank. How much of a priority is that for this summit? Because we've been hearing rumblings of discontent from some members.
I think that's precisely the reason why it is a priority, because of the discontentment that we have been listening from some members. We have listened to several different points. For example, how there could be how the NDB and the Belt and Road Initiative, they can put a choice for a country to choose whether to be a formal client of the NDB or a signatory of the Belt and Road. So perhaps the function of the NDB has not been made very clear, which led to the lack of capitalization, a delay in capitalization, and this discontentment that has brought up the issue to be a priority in the debates here in Brasilia today.
All right, Thiago, let's go back to Washington. Mike, back to you.
Right, Anand, thanks so much. You know, you mentioned the BRICS Business Forum, the speech by Xi Jinping. We wanted to play a little bit of that, and we want to get some reaction on the other side of it. So let's listen in.
China's development is an opportunity for the world. During the past 5 years, China has contributed an average 30% of world economic growth. Last year, China's direct outbound investment reached $143 billion, 53 times the number in 2002. Facing the future, China's commitment to continue opening up will remain unchanged, and so is the long-term positive trend of China's economy.
Chen Chenchen, one of the other things he said in his speech, I wrote some notes here, he called on the BRICS businesses to be brave, embrace innovation, and pursue green growth. Did he hit all the right notes, do you think?
Well, I do think we can actually expect two things to happen. The first is that, as we just talked about the NDB, actually since the very beginning, China wants to increase the say or the voting power of the NDB, not just to like consolidate the partnership with the developing world, but to essentially providing the finance and resources for the infrastructure projects and other projects across the world among the developing country. I think the other thing is that through exporting through the market access increase, actually, China is promoting the innovation interconnectivity among the developing countries.
Sourabh Gupta, it's really interesting because when this group first formed, a lot of people were scratching their heads. They didn't see where's the connection in all of this. In fact, The Economist basically conceded that the group was irrelevant, although last year, after the BRICS meeting in Johannesburg, they did acknowledge that they have a surprisingly good record at keeping their promises. Talk to us about the trajectory. Once this first started, and I think Anand already alluded to this, we kind of saw these as emerging markets, but it's been uneven for some countries. China, of course, and India, good amount of growth. Brazil's kind of hit some roadblocks along the way, and Russia and South Africa have their issues as well. But talk to us about this trajectory that we've watched.
I think their diversity, frankly, is the strength. You know, some of them are, China is a manufacturing superpower. Some of them, these other countries are resource superpowers. India has specialization in the services area. It's useful because when the economic cycle turns, it's not that it turns negatively for everybody. It turns negatively for some of them and perhaps positively for the other half of them. But the great beauty of BRICS is twofold, I would say. This is that rare set of countries which can afford genuine independent-mindedness in the international system, which are beyond, not part of the West, but they're not anti-Western, but they can afford that genuine independentness in their strategic thought and in their strategic behavior. And this creates certain commonality of interests, particularly in terms of championing global multilateralism and enhancing their voice within that system. And the other beauty, I think, of BRICS, especially because of their diversity and recognizing their diversity, the BRICS works as a forum where nothing is compulsory and everything follows from a conscious and common agenda. There are no litmus tests, and disputes are set aside, so they find common areas and they grow beyond that. Because at this point, at this stage, some countries know each other well, but some countries don't know other countries that well, and it's important that they get to understand each other and grow and develop on that basis.
Thiago, we heard from an official in Brazil earlier on one of our broadcasts saying that, yeah, there's engagement and there's deals, but they want deeper engagement. Is that something you're hearing there as well?
Thiago? Yes. This is something that I've been Yes, this is something that I've been hearing around the necessity of further engagement. Also, what we have seen is from the business leaders this exact type of narrative of a deeper engagement between the countries, a bigger promotion of what can be done together between them in periods outside the periods of the summits. In other words, something that is continuous throughout the year and not necessarily summit focused, but more than that, an engagement that can allow them to better understand how the NDB can play a role for their businesses.
And Chen Chenchen, it seems as though Xi Jinping is really pushing innovation again at this gathering. And of course, we're talking about 5G, AI. How does all of that fold in? And of course, the Belt and Road Initiative, of course, front and center for China as well.
Well, I think a very important part of the Belt and Road Initiative is the interconnectivity of the telecommunications infrastructure. And especially in the background of the US-China trade frictions, you can see private companies like Huawei, they are blocked in the US market. So since last year, you can see China is diversifying such cooperation destinations, including signing a bilateral compact with the countries like Russia. So nowadays, through the platform of the Brics, actually, you can see China is pushing ahead the more cooperation in terms of telecommunication. I think that is also why we are adding this innovation into the theme of the Brics this year. I think that's also the future of the next round of growth of the world economy.
And Anand, South Africa, of course, hosted it last year in Johannesburg. It was a great international forum for Cyril Ramaphosa to be out there on the international stage, in a sense. What does South Africa want this time around?
Mike, this summit comes at a crucial time for the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa. He's a relatively new president in South Africa, but the country is facing enormous economic challenges right now. If you just look at one figure, unemployment in South Africa running at something like 29%. I think that's the highest in the world. So one of the ways that Cyril Ramaphosa is trying to counter that is to attract more investment to the country. In fact, he was in Europe, in London, not so long ago, addressing an investment conference there, and just in the past week, there's been an investment conference in South Africa as well, and they got pledges to the tune of something like $24 billion. We'll see what happens with that. But that's where Brics comes in, and he's here at the Brics Summit. He's going to be talking to his co-leaders at the summit, asking them for help, and hopefully getting help from the New Development Bank. In fact, South Africa has already got some help from the New Development Bank. It got a loan of $790 million. Mainly for infrastructure. One of the things, in fact, the bulk of that loan will be used to construct a new power facility, a new power station in South Africa. The power utility company in South Africa, Eskom, has been having serious problems. It's led to rolling blackouts in South Africa. So the bulk of that loan will be used for power generation. Part of that loan will be used for a water project, which is known as the Lesotho Highlands Water Project, and part of it will also be used for green energy. So this is an important summit for him. He's got to get his message through to the other leaders at Brics.
And Anand, as you speak, we're looking at live pictures right now. President Xi Jinping and his wife Peng Leon arriving now for this gathering. There's a dinner going on this evening where all these leaders will gather and, of course, have some candid conversations while they eat a nice dinner. And as we watch Xi Jinping enter, one of the things, Sourabh Gupta, that we heard last year in their declaration at the completion of the summit there in Johannesburg was broader cooperation in areas related to the fourth industrial revolution. Have we seen any of that in the last year or so? Is that still something that's kind of gathering momentum, gathering steam?
Yes, it's early going, and of course we are at the early stages of this fourth industrial revolution, and it is going to be transformative. And one of the areas, aside from just pure industrial sector cooperation, is framing rules, the rules of the road in the multilateral system about how we go about regulating AI, et cetera, And in this regard, it's also important because, you know, you talked about 5G just now. Where Brazil and India are on 5G and Huawei is very different from where Russia is at this point of time. Brazil and India are still doing their due diligence on this front, and the Chinese are pretty insistent that, come on, we should not be excluded from this. So they have to get on the same page out here, of course. But it's important as the rules get set for digital trade at the WTO, at the OECD, at other multilateral venues, that they be able to have certain common positions on these issues so that they effectively are not left to hang alone, but they can hang together and find the best bargain for themselves.
Each one of these countries comes in with a set agenda. They want to leave this gathering with certain things. Talk to us about Russia and India. What are they looking for in this BRICS summit?
I think Russia and China have very good relations, are very close. India and China have trust issues in their relationship. The Russia-India relationship has been a little unbalanced simply because India's ties with US has blossomed over the past decade and a half, and some of it has come at the expense of the Russians, particularly in the arms and strategic arena. And so from the Indian perspective, it is to, again, restore that trust fully in that relationship because India sees Russia as a very important player in the international system and as a P5 power, frankly. And so Mr. Modi has taken great effort in trying to see how best he can restore the relationship to full health. He has a very good relationship with Mr. Putin. And aside from just, of course, a lot of trade, in strategic trade in terms of arms and really sophisticated military platforms, I think they want to broaden this relationship out beyond oil and gas to also doing high technology. And I think there's scope for it. But I think the two countries really want to stay close to each other, especially at a time of so much flux in the international system.
Chen Chenchen, back to you as we look at some more pictures there. One of the things that's interesting was Jair Bolsonaro was just there on a visit to China in October, not too long ago. And as Anand alluded to, there seemed to be some friction about what's this relationship going to be like between Brazil and China moving forward. How much did that go towards kind of sealing the deal? He's saying all the right things again in his meeting today with Xi Jinping.
Well, I do think there are disparities in every single bilateral relationship, but between countries like Brazil and China, actually, the common ground is that both countries, they want the openness, and they see the only way out is to developing the economy through openness. But the difference is that to what extent an economy should open itself. Actually, you can see that because of the differences in their industrial structure and also in their national capacity, so there could be some difficulties in trade negotiations or investment promotion. But my point is that we should increase the common ground in consolidating the mentality that openness is the only way out.
Sir, it's interesting, when BRICS was first formed, a lot of people were skeptical, as I said earlier, but they also had questions. You know, are they trying to change basically the rules of the game? Are they nibbling on the edges? What impact do you think has BRICS had on the global order, or has it had any kind of impact in terms of, because we saw them as emerging countries, what impact is BRICS having out there?
I think BRICS has an important role to play in the multilateral system, and we're talking environment, climate change, in the area of trade, in the area of the international monetary system, and in the area of international governance under the aegis of the UN Charter. Of course, the BRICS are trying to have got their act together on these fronts, even though, for example, at this summit on environment, where Brazil is and where the rest of the countries are is very different. But in areas like having a much larger say within the IMF, all of them are united, and all of them have taken strong positions in this regard. In terms of reform of the WTO, all of them have taken common positions in terms of how to reform the appellate body, because the appellate body is currently under threat at the WTO. So there are very distinct areas where they have had common positions. Of course, their weight is up to a point. They are not in a position to be rule makers, but they are in a point to ensure that their voices are heard and that at least decisions are not taken at the multilateral level which go against their interests directly, and that their views, even if they're heard but passed on today, are taken much more seriously a couple of years down the line and actually implemented.
Mm-hmm. And Thiago, you were mentioning protectionism earlier. I think it's interesting, though. I'd like to get your thoughts on this. You know, when you look at this trade friction between the United States and China, Brazil's actually benefited in a sense, because all of a sudden China's in need of soybeans and Brazil was there to fit that need. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yes, this is true. The trade war between China and the US has opened a window of opportunity for Brazil that has been used very well, mainly through the guidance of the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture in partnership with the Brazilian Ministry of Economy. I would say that this has contributed considerably for the soften up of the narrative that Bolsonaro had towards China, and also to this readjustment of the partnership and the approximation with China over these past months. However, the big question that lies in Brazil is, once this relationship between US and China, this trade war is fixed, and the two countries, they find an agreement, how will be Brazil's position? Will China go back to what it had before with Brazil, or will it maintain the same amount of the volume that Brazil exports to China?
Right.
So this is a question that everyone in Brazil asks today.
Yeah, we don't know the answer at this stage, do we? Anand, I'm going to give you the last stab at this. What can we expect moving forward?
Well, this is just day one of the Brics Summit, and as you pointed out, Mike, the leaders are enjoying a great dinner right now, and I can tell you the food is fabulous here in Brazil. But tomorrow they get back to work. There'll be multilateral meetings. There'll be a focus on technology cooperation. That's a big thing for Brazil, the host country here. If Brazil wants to focus on technology and technology development, they also want to look at countering terrorism, counterterrorism. That's a big thing for India as well. And of course, there will be bilateral meetings taking place tomorrow as well.
Well, we'll look forward to seeing you back on this broadcast tomorrow. Thanks again, and enjoy that meal. We're going to have to leave it there. CGTN will continue to provide extensive coverage on the Brics Summit this week. And for more, you can follow us online or on social media. Thanks again for joining us.